So this meeting is being recorded. It is the Economic Development Commission regular meeting of Thursday, February 6th, 2025. It's now 8:35 a.m. There's Steve. We do have a quorum, Steve. So I'm just calling the meeting to order, but I will turn things over to you for your welcoming remarks and introductions.
Sorry, thanks, Mark. Thanks for a packed agenda today and everyone joining despite the inclement weather. Well, I guess it's easier for everyone to join because we're all in our comforts of our home, I hope and suspect, except for Mark made it in from Monroe.
Gretchen's here as well.
Thank you as well, Gretchen. Always reliable and doing the hard stuff. I'll turn over to you. We have a full agenda. I think the first order of business probably we didn't pass the last two meeting notes, correct? Minutes.
Yeah. The first order would be to approve the minutes of our December 5th and January 9th regular meetings. If everyone's had a chance to review those minutes, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Jen's using the thumbs up emoji, so I will take that as a. Is there a second?
Yes.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you all. Just maybe for David's benefit, we can go around the horn in terms of who's on the call, starting with you, Steve, if you want to just introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll go from there.
Stephen Rosado, chairman, and been on the commission for about, I think, 7 or 8 years now. I just really enjoy it and appreciate Mark's leadership. And I'll just turn over to Jen, just going to where you are on my screen.
Sure. Hi, David. Jen Anderson. I'm the head of marketing and communications for Fairfield University. I also am a resident in the town. Been here about 25 years.
Matt, you want to go next?
Sure. Matt Rappaport. I've born and raised in Fairfield, third generation here, and been on the commission about 2 years.
Jen, the other Jen?
Other Jen, other school. So I'm an associate professor at Sacred Heart University, and this is new for me. So I'm fresh on the committee.
And Kenny?
Kenny Hockhauser, Fairfield resident for 16 years now. Member of the board for a few years. Sorry, I lost count. That's all I have.
And you work in commercial real estate.
Yes, I'm a commercial real estate broker doing most of my work in New York City, but sometimes my clients take me nationally.
And then Don Peterson, our Commissioner Emeritus. Don, you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. Don Peterson was a member of the commission for 10 years and now a member of the public.
All right. So, David, I'll let you introduce yourself, but David and I have had a long-standing working relationship. David grew up here in Fairfield, so knows the community very well. I'll let you take it away from there, David. Thank you for joining.
Great. Sorry, I had trouble getting it off mute there for a second. Thanks, Mark. And just give me a sense, I know you do have other things on the agenda. How long do you want me to keep it to, leaving time for questions?
10, 15 minutes with time for questions.
Yeah, perfect. So as Mark said, as you all shared in your introductions, I did live in Fairfield for 18 years, the first 18 years of my life. And my parents are still there. I go to Fairfield very, very regularly and have had the opportunity to work in the town as well. And Mark and I worked together, and I worked with your predecessors on this commission close to 15 years ago now, on some strategies around what was then Fairfield Metro planned station, now Fairfield Blackrock existing station. And it's been great to see the way the town has evolved and taken advantage of infrastructure investments to grow the grand list and continue to meet the needs of the population as it changes and grows. I'm here today to talk a bit about a new initiative that I'm running on behalf of the governor and the state of Connecticut that we think could be very advantageous for the town and for communities like it. It's called the Municipal Redevelopment Authority. It was established in statute actually in 2019, but for a variety of reasons, not least of which COVID, it did not get up and running until just this past summer. And so our first board meeting was July of 2024. And I started basically August 1st. So we've got about 6 months underneath us, and that time has been spent, building out our programs and policies and procedures. But our purpose per statute is to help communities, cities and towns develop housing around their train stations and in their downtowns in ways that make sense for them. It's very important to note at the outset that we don't have sticks. We don't come with any usurpation of local control. We are absolutely purely a carrot and a support structure to help towns and cities be, the best version of themselves that they can be. And so we have technical support. We have a variety of resources, not least of which are tens of millions of dollars in capital support that can be mobilized for infrastructure investment or direct, gap financing for projects that are in need after maximizing other sources. And so I'll tell you a bit about sort of the process and sort of how it's designed to work, and then certainly happy to answer any questions that folks have about what it might mean if Fairfield were to pursue this. So because it's voluntary and because it's exclusively opt-in, the first action is a resolution by the local legislative body, so the RTM in the case of Fairfield, to join us. There's no other requirements at that stage. It's merely an indicator to give us a sense and a level of confidence that we can start to allocate the time and the energy to work with that community, because there is local support from at least the executive and the legislative branches. Once the municipality opts in, we then start to roll up our sleeves together and we take a look at your zoning. And it's only the zoning within targeted geographies, either downtowns and or areas within a half a mile of train stations. And we don't have to look at every place that would meet that requirement. So we wouldn't, for example, in Fairfield, we wouldn't have to look at Southport and downtown and, the Fairfield Black Rock area, Commerce Drive. We could look at any or all of those places. We look at the zoning with a singular objective, which is our statutory objective, which is to determine whether or not the zoning will likely result in a substantial increase in new dwelling units. Now, substantial is obviously a fairly subjective term, and we've been talking a lot about this on our board. But I think the important point to make is that substantial obviously means something very different in every community. And so what we would consider substantial in Fairfield or a part thereof is very different than what we would consider substantial in Westport or in Bridgeport. And so we look at your zoning, and I could say with a fairly high level of confidence that we would be able to sign off on the zoning around Fairfield Black Rock today. And that would be a check the box exercise. I was intimately involved in that when it was created, and so I know what's in there, and the reality has borne witness to the fact that it's resulted in what I would certainly consider a substantial increase in new dwelling units. And so there are some areas in town where we may say, yep, zoning is there, we're good. There's other areas in downtown or in Southport, if we chose to look at it together, where we might make recommendations. But you don't have to take those recommendations, or the P&Z doesn't have to make those changes. It would purely be recommendations. Again, it's a little bit irrelevant for Fairfield because I think you're there around Fairfield Black Rock. But we may, decide to look together at downtown, and we may have recommendations, and the P&Z may or may not decide to take those recommendations. Once we have some area within the town where we have certified the zoning, and again, for sake of conversation, let's just focus in on Fairfield Black Rock station area. Once we say that zoning meets our requirements, We then would enter into an MOU with the first selectwoman around the development district parameters. And so that is predominantly setting the boundaries of that district. And so it would be some portion of the area within a half a mile of the train station that is also zoned for housing growth, as we have certified. When the boundaries are set, then the municipality, any property owner or developer therein can apply to us for funding support, for project funding support. And we can fund initiatives in one of four categories. We can fund transit-oriented development, which is mixed-use projects around a train station that support ridership. We can fund housing. We can fund building demolition or rehabilitation, site prep essentially. But our fourth category is development or redevelopment. And so really, we are a very flexible funding source that can be mobilized to whatever the particular needs are of that localized development district that we have created in conjunction with our partner municipality. And so, you know, it could be, as I said, it could be gap financing directly to a development. It could be sewer line expansion. It could be intersection reconfiguration. It could be anything that is explicitly geared towards unlocking that zoning potential. And then the final two pieces I'll note, you know, one is the things that we're trying to do in support of our municipal partners that go beyond direct funding for projects. And so there's two things in that category. One is kind of marketing and outreach and help identifying developers who may be a good fit for the municipality and trying to help with a bit of matchmaking. The other, which is something that towns and cities and developers have taken a very keen interest in, is we are, and I'll be clear that this is aspirational because it's fairly unprecedented within the state of Connecticut, but we're going to look at those development districts as a whole and understand, you know, where they will be if the zoning is realized by the private sector over the course of the coming decades, and try and get that through as much of the state permitting process as possible. There are certain state permits, in particular, Office of State Traffic Administration, flood management certification, that we believe can be front-loaded and are best addressed at this district scale. And by doing so, we can pretty significantly truncate the timeline for development in places where the zoning, you know, has been supported by the municipality. And just create some clarity and hopefully lower some costs in delivering the units that that the zoning calls for. The final piece that I'll note, just to give you a sense of kind of where we are in this process. So you know, as I said, we've been up and running for about 6 months. A lot of that has been just kind of setting ourselves up with policies and procedures. We are no municipality has yet adopted the resolution. We started circulating template resolutions, you know, that came through our outside counsel last month. So we've been distributing them for about 2 to 3 weeks. Thus far, 25 municipalities have requested that resolution and are in the process of taking that first step. They're towns, they're cities, they're wealthy, they're impoverished, they're all across the board. And so should Fairfield want to pursue this, you'd be in very good company. But I think, you know, knowing what I know about the town, certainly, and in particular, knowing what I know about the area around Fairfield Black Rock, I honestly don't think that there's really any downside for Fairfield. You know, obviously, it's got to be conveyed to the public in a way that people understand it and buy into it. But given that you've already done a lot of the hard work there, and given that you're already, you know, thinking about potential zoning changes downtown to facilitate the, you know, appropriate development within that context, it just provides you access to another funding source and a bench of technical support that can help you realize your vision. So happy to answer any questions or anything that wasn't clear or that I missed about how we work.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a few questions. Um, there's a lot there. It's very broad. I get the carrot part where there's support for like analysis and legal help and certainly funding. What is the, well, I guess back it up a little bit. What does success look like if there's a partnership between the town? Like who's defining the success? Is it the town? Is it the agency?
Yeah. Excuse me. I think it's both. Our success for us is more housing units. And let me be clear, we don't have an affordability requirement. Unlike many other programs in the state, we're about housing production and increase of supply. We certainly welcome and encourage communities like you've done to, build in inclusionary policies, but that's not a requirement of our funds. So success for us is a significant increase in the number of housing units that are built around our rail stations and in our walkable downtowns. Success for Fairfield will be, I think, a particular version of that that you all consider appropriate for the town. I think we'll be on the same page, but where we in a theoretical community where we may be on a different page is, we may think that there's a little bit more potential than the community is willing to allow through zoning, and we would have a back and forth, and we may not get to a place of consensus. But I don't suspect that would be the case in Fairfield, just given your past actions.
And also just curious, it's obviously a partnership. Who is the ideal partner within the town from your perspective? Is it the zoning board? Is it the economic development commission? Is it the first, the leader of the town, whether it's a mayor or selectman or whatever?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the way the statute is written, I think appropriately so, is that there are various steps that require explicit buy-in from the elected legislative body and the chief elected. That said, we know that, endorsement of those bodies does not necessarily mean, champion. And so we have worked to identify, and I think in many communities, it does end up being the Economic Development Commission. Several of the communities that we're talking to, acknowledging the necessary steps with the RTM or the city council or the board of alders, and the necessary buy-in from the chief elected, right? We don't come in the door unless the chief elected has made that first invite. But then there's some other entity. Typically it could be the P&Z, it could be a housing task force, it could be an economic development commission, who then really champion it. We like economic development because that's explicit in our statutory purpose. But it tells a more comprehensive case about why it is that we think housing is an appropriate, objective for communities, because it creates an opportunity for our employers to get their workforce, close by and grow the jobs that we so want.
Stephen, I'll just add that when we first did the planning study, which David knows well as in his role as at the time Connecticut chapter lead for Regional Plan Association, it was the Economic Development Commission that really put that on the table for planning and zoning and pushed it. There was initial reluctance by the Planning and Zoning Commission to actually undertake a planning study to look at alternative uses around the new train station. And the Economic Development Commission was in the forefront, basically making the case as to why it was appropriate for the town to be more proactive and look at land uses around the station, given the fact that they were historically, legacy manufacturing industrial uses, which really wasn't appropriate for the investment of a new commuter rail station. There was likely going to be some changes, and we wanted to be in the lead and directing that development as opposed to reacting to what developers had in mind. So the EDC played a critical role at that time. Eventually, the Planning and Zoning Commission jumped in wholeheartedly and moved forward on its own, but really EDC was the one that put it on the table. I see a similar role here.
I don't know, not quite. Sorry, go ahead, John, you go.
I was just I don't know if this is a statement or question, but I know, and I think Jen, you'll agree with this. I mean, retention of, young college graduates is an issue for the state in general. they're leaving the state. So I don't know if there's a tie-in to this relative to, even when the chamber just had their economic, breakfast, we heard retention as retention of talent as a big deal for both the town of Fairfield and the state. And given that we have 2 universities with a lot of talent coming out, I'm just wondering if there's a tie-in to this at all, Mark, relative to supporting that initiative, as it relates to future development.
I certainly think so. I'll let David chime in from his vantage point, but I certainly think so.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it varies in different regions of the state, right? When we're in the Southeast, it's about creating workforce housing for electric boat hiring, right? In other areas with a big hospital, it's about nurses and, staff at universities. It's not just about staff, but it's about the students that are emerging and finding ways to keep them in the state. Listen, I believe strongly that, in order to have a successful society, we need sort of a housing churn, right? There's a housing life cycle, and the housing that you need when you're a young professional is very different than a young family, and it's very different than an empty nester. And we're pretty long on certain products within that cycle and pretty short on others. And so I think the more that we create appropriate housing diversity, and not just for housing's sake, but create it in the places in our community where it reinforces walkable retail, entertainment, vibrancy, in the places in our community where there's a transit alternative, so it doesn't inevitably drive, traffic and congestion to the same degree. If we can get all those pieces right, then it's good for the young professionals, it's good for the empty nesters, it's good for the single family home values, because you have built-in buyers and someplace to go when you're ready to sell, right? It just lifts up everything. But again, it's not one size fits all, right? I want to be very, very, very clear about that. We will tailor our support to what the community thinks is the right strategy, and we'll push a bit, right? I mean, we're not just going to take it at face value. We'll provide some recommendations and some best practices and some precedent. But what we ultimately achieve through a partnership with a Fairfield, for example, would be very, very different than what we do right next door in Bridgeport, for example.
I know great question. One of the questions I have is just the funding as a resource. I'm assuming there must be stipulations around it. I just go back to one of the developments that over near Illicit, where to have the site remediated, the state funds came with you have to pay prevailing wage, and it just didn't cost too much. Are you pulling in private developers as part of that package? Yeah. So we're a bit different, right? So that funding would come from the Department of Economic and Community Development, which has its own statutes that govern prevailing wage, which are dictated by all of its funding sources. We do have prevailing wage triggers, as all state funds do, but it varies depending on how it is mobilized for a project. So to drastically overly simplify things, if we were to grant it for infrastructure or some other public use, it would trigger prevailing wage. If we were to loan it to the project as gap financing, it would not. There's nuance there, but that's kind of the simplest way to think about it. If we're providing, low interest loans with terms that are, listen, if someone's coming to us with a gap and they can demonstrate that they've maximized debt and equity and potentially some other public sources, then we will tailor our terms to meet the deal. I appreciate it. I'm sorry, I had a lot of questions so I can understand better. Mark's opinion on engaging in this and moving forward, or?
Yes, I think it's, I don't see a downside, as David indicated earlier. We already have the area around Fairfield Black Rock, which is the area that we've identified for new investment and growth, zoned appropriately to support new dwelling within a transit-oriented development model. So, mixed use where it makes sense, along major, corridors and such, but, allowing for, significant residential densities, which would support, the new development of a new neighborhood over there. So I do think that it meets the requirements right off the bat. And so what this really does is open up a panoply of both technical, planning support and other resources, as well as infrastructure and other, financial tools that we can use to spur development. And, I'm specifically thinking about, the long stalled development, around the Fairfield Black Rock Station, and ways in which we could help, whether it's plugging a gap, as David indicated, or additional infrastructure support, to meet, our expectations there. I think this has great promise to hopefully move that forward in a way that realizes the town's vision for that area. So I think that's what I see. I don't see a downside, from the standpoint that it is, completely voluntary, and, we're either choosing to accept those resources or we're not. So I know Kenny had some questions too. I don't know if you're in a position where you can chat.
Yeah, I'm at my desk now. No, I mean, most of the questions were somewhat answered. But where within your mandate is commercial development?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our statute very clearly prioritizes housing, right? Housing growth is our primary objective, but our statute does also speak about broader economic development objectives, vitality, vibrancy, diversity of uses, et cetera. And I read, and it's never exactly clear, the precise intent of statutory language, but I read the differentiation of categories of eligible funding between transit-oriented development and housing to say that if we're in a downtown not near transit, our focus is housing. But if we're in a transit district within a half a mile of a station, our focus is transit-oriented development, which is more broad. I don't foresee us directly engaging in an exclusively commercial development, but I do think, one, there's some other new potential state sources around repurposing older commercial sites, which could be advantageous and dovetail with us. But one thing that's come up pretty frequently on my board is oftentimes there'll be a mixed use building and the municipality is requiring ground floor retail or other activities because of its location and the need to activate the streetscape. And the residential units might pencil, but the commercial is a drag. And so I could absolutely imagine us playing a role in the commercial space, either in addition to or in lieu of a role in the residential space, if that's what's required to deliver that product as envisioned by zoning and the community. So, that's not exactly a precise answer, but I do think we have some statutory allowance related to commercial development, but our priority is absolutely housing production.
Understood. Thanks. Appreciate that.
Other questions from folks? And then we'll have an opportunity to further discuss this, I'm sure, at our March meeting. But I want to thank David for spending a few minutes this morning to explain the MRDA and what the potential benefits would be to the town if it were to choose to join. I know there's some interest on the part of members of the representative town meeting. But again, I think the Economic Development Commission does play a vital role in terms of putting this on the table, so to speak. And I'm sure, from the RTM's perspective, to have a referral from a group like the EDC would be very helpful. So I think that's what I envision here is maybe after we have a chance to digest what David's presented, then talk more at our next meeting. Perhaps we would consider making a positive referral to the RTM with respect to the MRDA participation. Anything else before I let David go? enjoy the snow.
Yeah, cheers. Yeah, well, thanks for the
Okay.
time, everyone. And if you got any questions, between now and the next meeting, I think, Mark, you have the statute language. I can send you that if not, but if anyone wants to kind of dive in deeper, don't hesitate to be in touch.
Do you also, is there a one-page,
There will be in about a week.
not yet, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to send along the statute, I'll just make sure I have that in the packet,
Yeah.
so. All right, thank you, David. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you. Nice to meet you all. Good to see you,
Thanks,
Mark.
I appreciate it.
Okay. Steve, I don't know if you have the agenda with you or you just want me to
I
take.
think I just closed it out by accident.
Okay.
So,
The next item, just to cue you up, is to consider and act upon an annual report submission to the RTM. I've presented a couple different things from our department in terms of an economic outlook. I shared that with both the Board of Finance and the Chamber Board of Directors recently. Where this is coming from, there's a provision in the general statutes, which was basically the enabling authority by which this commission was formed. Kind of got lost in the ordinance establishing the Economic Development Commission, but the town attorney so helpfully pointed it out. And it's Connecticut General Statute 7-136, and it says the commission shall annually prepare and transmit to the legislative body of its municipality a report of its activities and of its recommendations for improving the economic conditions and development of the town or city. So the town attorney said, and I was not aware of this because I was looking at the local ordinance, which basically established the commission, on which the statute, we're all creatures of the state, so the statute is the overarching legislative authority to do so. But in any event, the town attorney has pointed this out. So my hope would be to synthesize the information that I've already presented to this board at our January meeting. And then if you're in agreement, to have the Economic Development Commission authorize the chair and the director to file a report with the RTM and appear at their either February or March meeting to answer any questions, if that would be okay.
It makes perfect sense to me. Do we need a motion to vote on that, or?
Yeah, it would be great to just, I would say, just authorize the chair to file an annual report with the RTM on the economic conditions of the town. And, I don't think there's going to be anything extraordinary in that report that you haven't already seen in our January meeting. We had identified a couple things that the commission would likely be working on with obviously support from this office in the upcoming year. One is, we're hoping to conduct a small business resource fair, hopefully this fall. One is to explore our participation in the MRDA, which we are doing. And then another was to look at opportunities to leverage strategic town assets by looking at market demand to determine highest and best use. And the property that we had initially focused on, and that Kenny Hockhauser had agreed to take the lead, is the auxiliary parking lot at 140 Mill Plain Road. So I think those three things are things that we can point to that we're looking at as part of our role for the upcoming year. And other than that, I think we're hopefully, unless you have questions, I would ask for that motion.
Motion to vote on endorsing that.
Yeah. Okay.
Anybody?
Yeah. I
Second.
endorse.
Jen and Matt. So
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
okay. So a couple things I put in your packet. Steve, if I may continue with your permission there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a couple things just for informational. One is the tax collector is proposing an ordinance to the RTM I thought would be of interest to this board. I don't see any major issue with it. It makes sense to me. It's commonsensical. But it would allow for the tax collector and others to withhold licenses and town approvals in the event that there was an outstanding tax delinquency. I recall when I first got here to town that we routinely did this. When somebody applied for a building permit, they had to get a stamp from the tax collector indicating that the property was current on its taxes. When we run business grant or loan programs, as a matter of policy, we routinely check with the tax collector to determine whether or not the business is current on its tax obligations. The way our programs read that the business should be in good standing. And by that, typically it's an established form of business. It's licensed or registered with the state or through the town, through the office of the town clerk, and they're current on their tax obligations. So I don't see this as a major departure from what we were doing. What I found out when I talked to the tax collector is that the town lacks the actual statutory authority by which to withhold building permits in the event there's a tax delinquency. So when this tax collector arrived, he made a change to the procedure because he noticed that there wasn't any statutory authority, local ordinance in effect, as compared to the 95% of other communities that have something similar on the books. So it's been a while in terms of coming forward, but we're correcting that kind of loophole. And again, from my standpoint, I don't see it as a major departure for how we administer business grant programs, nor do I think, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I don't know why.
Yeah, no, I cannot agree more.
I just wanted to put on the agenda just to make sure that I wasn't misreading things, and I want to get other folks' interpretation. But I was asked by the first selectman, what's the impact to businesses? Well, certainly there could potentially be an impact. We won't be able to move forward. There are exceptions, obviously, in the event of a real emergency issue, but I don't see a downside, really, a major issue or impact.
I have a question.
Yeah, Kenny.
If someone is in arrears, but they have an approved repayment plan, do they still have the pathway to get their necessary approvals?
Yeah, I believe that is allowed, that there is a mechanism in place to repay that.
Okay, great.
Other questions? Again, I just wanted to put on for informational.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. The other thing was I put in your packet an opportunity to work with the local Fairfield Sustainable Committee, Sustainable Fairfield Committee. I get them confused. Used to be the Clean Energy Task Force here in town. But we've done this in the past. I don't know if everyone on the commission knows, but we are a participating municipality in the CPACE program, which allows for businesses and nonprofits and other groups to pay for upgrades to their facilities that have an energy conservation component. And essentially the town finances it like a special assessment. So they get the funding from the Connecticut Green Bank to do the work, and then the tax collector works to basically finance the project and repay the loan in effect. And there's always a positive repayment. There's always a benefit to that. They have to do an assessment up front to determine whether or not it pencils out. So there really isn't a huge risk I don't see a huge risk any of the organizations, and we have a number that have taken advantage of this opportunity. We periodically have done these workshops to help spread the gospel and the word. to businesses that might be interested, and we would want to do so again this spring. And again, it's not a heavy lift for this office. We work with the commission and the Sustainable Fairfield Committee to do so, but there is an opportunity to receive some no-cost technical assistance from Connecticut Greenback and Sustainable CT Committee to do that workshop. So it would be my intent to pursue that. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions. The biggest drawback really is that a lot of our commercial entities are, organized as triple net leases. So the utility costs are passed through to the underlying tenants, but the improvements to the facilities accrue to the property owner. And so there's that disconnect between the two. It works well if you own the building and you're occupying the building and you receive the benefit of lower utility costs ultimately to help offset the cost of these improvements. It's not so clear cut when you're a tenant in a building, and that's been the biggest impediment to getting more bang for the buck out of these programs in the past. So we're constantly.
Is there an opportunity to negotiate with like the tenant to the landlord, like, hey, I'm going to put these, let's share in the benefit. I'll give you.
Exactly. There's a way to do it for sure. It's just that not every landlord is as
I can imagine.
progressive and far-sighted on that.
So yeah, that is a disconnect in the incentive there.
I don't see a huge downside to it. I really wanted to make you all aware that we are participating in this value. We've had several businesses and nonprofits take advantage of this program. Churches and synagogues can also finance improvements this way. So it's a good program. It's basically nationwide, but Connecticut was one of the leaders in pioneering this particular financing model. So I'll pause there. I don't have too much else to add to my report today, unless you have. We had a nice meeting. I know a number of you. I know Jen was there at the Economic Outlook breakfast with the Chamber of Commerce. John Trainer was the keynote speaker. I was a little under the weather, but managed to get through my presentation okay, I think. But happy to take any questions on projects or things that you're observing out there in the community.
Nothing comes to mind. We working on a few things, so I think we have a good agenda to get us going for the start of the year.
Yep.
No, I'll be asked tomorrow, Mark, about the status of the hotel, so I might as well ask that.
Yeah, the hotel. That's one of the things I'm hopeful that we might be able to. We've had conversations. There's been a little bit of change in the ownership structure for the developers at Fairfield Blackrock Station, the so-called crossings. I'm not sure what we're calling the development now. I'll just refer to it as the crossing. So it was approved for almost 360 residential units with a 118 key hotel, as well as some ancillary retail and commercial office uses. Building number 4, the first residential building, is under construction. We had a pause as they sorted things out from a financing standpoint. That the lead developer had, I think, overextended himself, frankly, and got into a little bit of a financial issue, and the folks that were providing the financing for the project stepped in. So they've kind of flipped positions. They're now in the lead. The original developer is kind of in a subordinate role. They're still moving ahead with, and they've since picked up construction on the residential building, which hopefully will finish mid-year. But again, their thought was, we weren't overly excited about the overall development plan that was approved. It certainly met the requirements, but it wasn't the most transit-oriented piece. It looked like a bunch of buildings with parking lots around them. which isn't really, taking full advantage of the fact that it's located next to a train station. So we did think there was additional development potential there that would help support commercial assets like a hotel that perhaps, there might be some skepticism within the market as to whether or not, there's enough demand to meet that requirement and have it pencil out. So the promise was always the residential piece, like David had indicated, would help cover the cost initially for some of the commercial pieces that maybe weren't as strong financially. So that's still the plan. They are hopefully coming back in with some revisions to their overall master plan for the site. But we don't have a timetable for that. And part of it is, I think, just the overall uncertainty in the financial markets and where interest rates and other things are going right now. So I think people are kind of playing a wait and see a little bit, certainly in the new administration coming on board. On the other side, we have the proposed development at the Circle Inn, which is moving ahead with their presentation of planning and zoning to get their entitlements in order. But they're proposing to redevelop that entire site and put in a new hotel with more bedroom count, more keys, but also, as has been observed several times, the Circle Inn was great for its time, but its time has passed. So it's an older asset. It does need to be revitalized, and so that's the overall plan, which again is offset and partially covered through additional residential development. But we're just beginning that process now. And we have the governor coming down at Fairfield University this month. So
I do have one other separate question, just on the 830G moratorium.
yeah.
How are we doing on that proceeding?
So the application was submitted prior to the holidays. It was accepted. We since received word that it is considered complete. I think the public comment period, we've gone through a series of public comment periods. We had to make it available for public comment prior to our submitting it to the state. And then the state, once it receives and certifies that it's complete, has to make it available and receive public comment on the application before it can render a decision. I think that public comment period has since closed. I'm aware of at least one public comment that was submitted by one of the attorneys who's pursuing an 830G application in town, as well as in other communities. So I suppose I know that the state will have to respond to any comments that they receive. They have 90 days to complete their review and make a determination as to whether or not we've met the requirements. And that deadline is more or less the end of March. So we would expect a determination by the end of March, if not sooner. We're certainly pushing and hoping for sooner. But in the meantime, we're getting, as probably all of you know, kind of inundated with new housing applications. Some are okay or reasonable proposals in areas that would support new housing development, others not so good. So unfortunately, we're going to have to get through that and all those once the state grants the moratorium, then it takes effect, and we would be, any of those new applications would be precluded. But it doesn't, unfortunately, until that time, we're vulnerable.
Just curious, is there a mandated time limit on those application reviews? I mean,
Yes, there is.
Okay.
So that's the process that planning and zoning has to juggle, and that's why they're meeting virtually every week at this point instead of their regular 2-a-month schedule, because they have a certain time period in which to conduct a hearing or render a decision on these applications. They can with the applicant's permission, get an extension. That's been challenging for them because a lot of these require multiple nights of public hearings.
I mean, if the option, if you're going to be close to getting the moratorium, slow walking some of these. So if people are going to like stack the deck one way,
unfortunately, we have to take up anything that was filed prior to the moratorium being granted. So they won't apply to anything. That's why we're getting these applications. People are just putting it in as kind of a placeholder, if almost in a way. They're complete applications, but some are not particularly well thought out, I don't think. That's my observation. Any other questions on 830G or other things going on?
Just the comment on or adding in like that Soundview, that project that's going through, that's going to be, I guess, in the back of either Stop and Shop or the Floor and Decor. It's a Stop and Shop. People are certainly up in arms about that. It is really outsized and does not belong there, but I mean, for that neighborhood.
It's really the scale and the orientation. It's along a commercial corridor, so you can certainly see potential to have some housing, mixed use, or some housing at that location. But
five stories.
It's a little. I think that's always the issue with most of these, is that the scale is akin to, I think somebody says, like trying to get 10 pounds of sugar in a 5-pound sack. So that's probably a good analogy for most of these applications, where people are kind of pushing the envelope a bit much. And I think, not that there wouldn't be a concern regardless from folks that might live in the neighborhood, but I think that certainly aggravates things a bit. And you do have to understand that when you do a redevelopment of a site, you have to have some additional density to justify making the additional investment. But again, I think this probably exceeds what we would normally expect under such circumstances. So they did approve it reluctantly because I don't think
I saw the comments saying like
felt that they had a choice, because again, the standard is you have to have a compelling public health safety need that's supported by the evidence in the record that outweighs the need for affordable housing, and there simply wasn't one to deny it. Or at least that was the commission's finding. So just for the next couple meetings, March, one thing I want to mention, we are updating our 5-year consolidated plan for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, assuming there will be a U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. But we receive federal dollars through the Community Development Block Grant Program, or at least we have for 50 plus years. And so every 5 years, we have to go through a more comprehensive planning process to identify priority housing, community development, and economic development needs of the community. And we typically ask the Economic Development Commission if they would conduct a workshop as part of our outreach and planning effort around economic development. And so I would want to devote a little portion of our March meeting to that. I'll provide some background as to how we deploy those federal dollars. It's really for micro enterprise or small business grants we've done in the past. But we have done other infrastructure related projects that help support economic development, kind of as one-offs. And then I know Ken and I and Steve have met and talked about the Mill Plain Road lot, and we'll have some initial feedback to the group on that for March. At least that's my hope and plan. And then hopefully April, I know, Jen, we didn't get a chance to meet, but I was hoping maybe we have a chance to
We can host.
Have a meeting at Fairfield U to understand. We kind of do the spring and fall between the two, just to understand what's going on at the university, and both in terms of on-campus facilities as well as programs and other offerings. So I think that would be great if we could do that for April. Anything else, Steve?
I think we had a packed agenda today. And we're at time. I guess motion to adjourn.
Great. I see.
Second,
people- Yeah, there you go, Matt. We were adjourned at 9:30. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.